Okay, if everyone wants to be seated, which they are, except for a few, I want to start the meeting with a couple things. This is the fullest house we've had since COVID, with the online and everything. And it's nice to see warm bodies here, boys like this. Second thing I need to tell you is this is being recorded for the first time. But the X marks the spots up here, which I was so questionable about this morning to Denise, and we can explain that, but it's for future when we do have to record. So it is being recorded, so we can't say four-letter words, and we have to be fairly nice today. So for the meeting call to order, what I'm going to do is, because we have a full house, we're going to introduce everyone, and I would prefer you to introduce yourselves and tell what your work is here at the department or what you represent on the board. So we're going to start right there with Dr. Marsh.
Brett Marsh here at the Board of Animal Health.
I'm Tim Rice, and representing the meat packing industry at a processing plant in Spencer, Indiana. I've been in the industry for several years, sold the plant this past February.
Virgil Bramer, Rush County, representing beef cattle industry. We raise feeder cattle.
In BOAH, I'm a small animal veterinarian.
Keith Beer, dairy cattle industry from Adams County.
Craig Bowers, sheep industry from Tippecanoe County.
Hi, Ashley Armstrong. This is my first time here. And I am a large animal veterinarian in Springville, Indiana.
Ty Harwiger, representing poultry in Jackson County,
Darrell Ragland, I'm the College of Veterinary Medicine representative for the board.
Tracy Gillespie, I'm a small animal internist in Indianapolis.
Gary Haynes, Chief of Staff at the Board of Animal Health.
I'm Bill Doig. I'm representing the equine industry. I do still practice, even though I'm getting some age on me.
I'm Denise Spears. I'm the Public Information Director for the Board of Animal Health.
Yeah, Mike Kopp, Director of Avian and Poultry Health.
Good morning, Maria Cooper, Senior Director of Planning.
Good morning, Dorfine Wilson at BOAH. I'm the Senior Director of Logistics.
Kyle Shipman, Animal Programs Division Director.
Isaac Trainer, I was just hired as a veterinary epidemiologist for the Board of Animal Health.
Patrick Hatch, Dairy Division Director.
Jennifer Strausser, I'm the Director of Equine Programs at the Board of Animal Health and also the District 1 Field Veterinarian.
Let's start over here.
Hi, I'm Dr. Carrie Sir. I'm the Director of Meat and Poultry Inspection here at the BOAH.
I'm Catherine Box. I am the Governor's Office Liaison to BOAH.
Sarah Simpson, I'm the General Counsel for the Board of Animal Health.
John Ball with Purdue College of Agriculture.
Kenny Hendricks, Director of Indiana's Animal Health Diagnostic Lab.
Tina Zaring with the Dairy Division here at BOAH.
Lisa Purrius with the Indiana Veterinary Medical Association.
Jared Hagnow, Assistant PIO.
Okay, thank you all for coming. Dr. Marsh will go to the representing recognition of employees.
Yes. As is customary at each of these quarterly board meetings, we recognize employees of the Board of Animal Health on 5-year increments of service, and we have a series of those. These are you running?
Yeah. Sorry.
If you would, please. Years of service. So Troy Casada has been with us 5 years with the meat and poultry inspection program. Looks like he's doing some animal ornament inspection there, Tim. So got live animals behind him. So also Remington Wolf for 5 years with our meat and poultry inspection program. Julio Rodriguez for 10 years with the Board of Animal Health meat and poultry inspection program. Kenny Heinbrook for 20 years, MPI, the Meat and Poultry Inspection Program. Kenny, I think he's announced his retirement. Shortly, he is. And on the board, Dr. Bruce Lamb for 20 years. I don't know where those 20 went, but Bruce is doing a great job in Northeast Indiana and all points up in that area. So those are the ones that we have along with Dr. Lamb there, but we have a special one today. And this person has been with the state of Indiana for a number of years, and she's not inclined for a lot of fanfare and recognition. So we finally got her in the room today, and it's Tina Zaring. And if Tina would come forward, I have a certificate for her, and she's been recognized by the governor's office as well. But folks, she's been servicing the citizens of the state of Indiana for 45 years. I don't know how you could look so young.
I was just a babe when I started.
So Tina, thanks for your distinguished service to the citizens of the state of Indiana for these 45 years. She's still working. She's not retired. She's still with us. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Pictures in.
There we go.
That might be the only picture we get.
That might be.
So don't lose it.
All right, I'll add it to my collection.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go ahead with the minutes. You have them in your packet. Are there any questions or changes that need to be made? If not, I need a motion to approve. And a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve. Gary, we have to do a roll call vote because we did.
I don't know that David's online. You can check to see if he's on.
Yes.
He just joined.
Okay, great. Yes, we'll do a roll call since we have someone online. The motion is approval of the July 2023 minutes. Dr. Armstrong,
Aye.
Keith Beer,
Yes.
Craig Bowers,
Yes.
Virgil Bremer,
Yes.
Dr. Gillespie,
Yes.
Dr. Hall,
Yes.
Dave Harden. Dave, we can't hear you. Ty Harwiger,
Abstain.
Dr. Ragland.
Yes.
Tim Rice.
Aye.
Dr. Doig.
I approve. The reason that we had an abstain is because he was not online and he was not here at the last meeting, so he doesn't really know what happened. I will tell him he was in Hawaii on vacation. That is approved because of even though we had an abstinence. Okay, public hearing, Sarah?
Good morning. In your materials, there are 3 documents for this public hearing. The first is the final rule document for LSA number 23-340. And there's also the economic impact statement, and then also the IEDC comments. We did not receive any additional written public comments, so the only comments that you have are from the IEDC in your materials. So the proposed rule that we are that you're considering today is making changes to the animal movement rule 345 IAC 1-3, and this is the section that has the requirements for moving equines into Indiana. And so subsection A has the general requirement, the blanket requirement that animals must be accompanied by a CBI that meets BOAH's requirements. And then you'll see that there are a list of exemptions from the CBI requirement in certain movements. And so what is in the proposed rule or the final rule document is adding 2 exceptions that will align BOAH's rule with the federal regulations. So there is an exception to federal regulations that allows shipping and receiving states to authorize equines to move with documentation other than a CBI, such as an EIA test chart. So what this will do, you'll see that new language there in number 5, that it allows equine to move directly to an approved livestock market if they are either accompanied by an official laboratory test report indicating a negative EIA test, or they receive that EIA test upon arrival at the market in accordance with our EIA rule. So that's the first amendment. The second amendment, as you look further down in the final rule, it is adding a second exception that's present in the federal regulations that was not in BOAH's rule, and that is to allow equines to move either in accordance with the USDA VS 127 permit or a state permit issued by the state of Indiana, or other form of movement control authorized by a government agency. So this is really more to address unique situations where Board of Animal Health, USDA may involve in authorizing a restricted movement of an equine under certain conditions without a CPI. So as you're looking at the economic impact statement, back to the first, the movement to a livestock market, I worked with our team to survey our markets to determine what the cost savings would be. And so the determination, we had 5 markets that regularly hold horse sales, where horses are brought from out of state. We also have special horse sales that take place at 4 of Indiana's livestock markets. And so in surveying those licensed markets, we estimated the total number of horses between 13,500 to 14,000 horses that are sold at those markets annually, averaging about 38% coming from out of state. And so that's how we came to the total cost savings of this amendment there at the bottom of page 1. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have on the final rule document prior to you opening the floor for any public testimony.
Anyone on the board have any questions or comments? If not, we will open for public comments on this. Everyone's so talkative this morning. Okay, no public comments, so we will close that and go to a vote on this. Need a motion to approve this?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Moved and second. Gary will do it.
Who was the second? Who was the second? Great.
Right.
Okay, motion to approve the equine rule as read. Dr. Armstrong?
Aye.
Keith Beer?
Yes.
Craig Bowers?
Aye.
Virgil Bremer?
Yes.
Dr. Gillespie?
Aye.
Dr. Hall?
Yes.
Dave Harden?
Yes.
Ty Harberger?
Yes.
Dr. Ragland?
Yes.
Tim Rice?
Aye.
Dr. Doig?
Yes, that's approved. Okay, Sarah, if you want to go ahead.
So I will transition to the readoption of expiring rules, LSA number 23-625. And so this is the readoption that we do every year, readopting Board of Animal Health rules. There was in the 2023 legislative session a bill which made some changes to the readoption process. So this is our first rule readoption under the new rulemaking process. So the main change is that now rules expire January 1st of the 5th year after the year in which the rule takes effect. Previously, that was 7 years. So that was a change. The process remains pretty similar. We published, and let's see, it was expired on September 29th. We published a notice of public comment for the public to comment on the list of rules that we propose to readopt. That comment period concluded on September 30th. And so we've been through the 30-day comment period. We did not receive any public comments on the rules. As state agencies, we have to prepare responses if we do receive any public comments. So we have been through that process. And you'll see also in your materials that there continues to be the requirement for a regulatory analysis where there's a longer document included that goes through each rule and has a discussion about the continued need. The new piece of that is part 2 that you see where we are required to provide an analysis of fees, fines, and civil penalties for each rule. So that's a little bit different, but this should look very similar for those board members that have been here previously. The process by and large remains pretty much the same. So the readopted final rule then, after the 30-day comment period is concluded, then the board can make a decision to readopt the rules, or you can also extend to have an additional comment period if necessary. So I'm happy to answer any questions on the rule readoption.
So with the change in the 5-year, is this a 5-year or a 7-year?
So this, under the new process from this time forward, They will be every 5 years that we have to renew the rules.
So this one's
So,
been 7.
so yes, it has. So
There,
this
just
is,
for clarification.
yeah,
it's
so
been
now all
7.
the state agencies will be
Right.
doing this for all the rules every 5 years versus 7.
Any questions? If not, we need a motion to accept and adopt this.
So moved.
Second? Gary will give a roll call.
On the question of voting or approving readoption of the rules, Dr. Armstrong? Keith Beer?
Yes.
Craig Bowers? Virgil Bremer? Yes. Dr. Gillespie? Dr. Hall?
Yes.
Dave Harden?
Yes.
Ty Harberger?
Yes.
Dr. Ragland?
Yes.
Tim Rice?
Aye.
Dr. Doig?
Yes, so that is approved. Thank you, sir. Now let's go to ADDL.
Morning.
Morning.
Staying on my end. Morning, everybody. You should have a report from me, and this is the time of year that we get to look at the entire fiscal year. So I'm just a short little blurb about fee or revenue. So I just want to highlight a few points on here. I'm not going to go through every number, but historically, what you can see is we run at about a $200 and something thousand deficit every year. The exception was 21, but you can sort of ignore that year. That was the year a lot of our staff salaries were subsidized by Purdue because we tracked hours dedicated to COVID testing. So that kind of threw off the math that year, which is a benefit to us, of course, but we won't consider that a typical year. So ignoring FY 2021, you can see we're always running about a deficit. And what you might remember is in May of 22, we went ahead and moved forward with a market wage adjustment for our staff, which was a burden of about $300,000 annually. So when you look at that bottom number for FY 2023, that should be negative 500,000. It's not. So even though it looks like nothing has improved, I'm here to tell you it has. And if you hop back up to the sales and service line, you can see that increase was about 300,000. So our increase in sales and test revenue basically countered our increase in staff wages, which is really great news. So even though it looks like nothing's changed, we're on track, and I'm saying this out loud, it's recorded too, right? I really think this is the year where we're gonna break even on our budget, if not come up a little positive. So things are bright. I'm very encouraged by these numbers. Do you have any questions for me about this spreadsheet?
For fiscal years 2020 and 2022, the other column seems to go up quite a bit. Is there a reason for those 2 years on the expenses?
I'm sorry, let me track with you here. The, other expenses.
Yeah, other expenses for 2020, 2022. I mean, that's a big jump from the other 2 years.
No, I would have to go dig into that category because there are a lot of things we consolidated into these rows to make it more readable. That's a great question. Again, I would kind of ignore 2020. So maybe my question is, why is FY 2023 different? I can look into that and get back to you. I'm not quite sure. Okay. All right, so just wait till next year. It's gonna be good. The next bullet point, I'm excited to tell you, we have received $1 million on the way to our account right now from NALM. So NALM is the National Animal Health Laboratory Network. Sorry for using acronyms. This is funding that was available to all NALM labs. And you just had to submit a financial plan in keeping with your mission. And our focus of our financial plan we submitted was expanding capacity. So with this money, we are essentially doubling our PCR capacity. Primarily, the money is going toward equipment and service agreements. But there's a minor bit of updates in the room to make sure we have all the electrical outlets available. We're moving a sink out of there to make space for more of the PCR equipment. So that's the focus of that. So that's very exciting news and very good for the state. A little update on our open positions. I'm very excited. I'm now allowed to tell you, Dr. Viju Pillay is going to be joining us in January as a pathologist, anatomic pathologist on our ABDL team in West Lafayette. He was one of our pathology residents, so it's possible you have encountered him in the past. So we're very excited. He's coming back in January. I have a few tech positions we're in the process of filling, and that's all going well. And then I have a list of our new positions that are now able to exist because of the increase in funding. The first one's our HICI diagnostician. Dr. Chris Gaudette started yesterday. So that is very exciting. Historically, we had 2 diagnosticians at the HICI lab until 2009. In the recession, one of those positions got lost. It's very, very good news for our clients, for Dr. Bertram, our other diagnostician at the lab, to have 2 there now. So we're very excited about that. So please welcome Dr. Gaudette when you see him. We're still looking for more applicants for the client service veterinarians. So if you know anybody in private practice who's looking for a change of pace, you please send them our way, because we really are looking for someone who can understand the diagnostic side of things, to interface with our clients and provide a higher level of service to our customers. We're about to fill, real close to filling the assistant quality manager position. The IT client experience person, we're waiting to see how our LIMS assessment shakes out, which I'll tell you about in a second, so that we can make sure we write that job description correctly. So that's why that one's on hold, but we're real close to being able to move forward with that. And actually the faculty microbiologist position, I'm starting to try to get the description routed through the university for approval, so we can post that position. Okay, so LIMS, my other acronym I use, is our Laboratory Information Management System. So this is one of the things that will be funded through our non-recurring piece of our budget this cycle. And so the update on this for you guys is we have completed our list of requirements, which is basically our giant list of the things we need or want prioritized in an organized way. We've sent that out to between 15 and 20 companies that provide LIMS solutions, and they have been instructed to get back to us by the middle of October. So once they get back to us, we'll be able to take that list and make it a short one of who might actually be a solution for us, and then we'll dig a little deeper with those particular companies. And I'm hoping when I see you all again in January, I can tell you what our plan is. We'll be real close, if not there, knowing how we're going to move forward. Construction update. I'm hoping in the next couple months we get our final approvals for moving forward with the incinerator project. Again, that's funded through our non-recurring state funds. We're working with engineers right now, something about smokestacks. So we're waiting for some final details on that planning, and we'll be able to move forward with the replacement of our incinerator and a rail extension to it. And finally, we've been working on our strategic plan since around January, February of this year. We've spoken to many of you. We've had a lot of really great conversations with stakeholders, and we hope to have that completed by December. So again, I will have that to share with you in January.
Any questions or comments?
On the LIMS system, are you getting questions from vendors about it, or is it pretty standard?
We haven't heard back from them yet. Perhaps when they get back to us in response to our, what it's officially called a request for information that we put out there, that might be when they come back to us with questions, but we haven't heard anything from them yet.
And $1 million from the NOM is a one-time.
That is something. It's one time.
Okay.
That'd be great if it's not, but
it's a big deal.
yeah, one-time funding, but really, really positive things we're able to do with it. It's really exciting.
But do you receive recurring money from NOM?
We do. Yeah.
You do.
As a NOM network lab, we get funding annually from them.
Okay. I just wanted the board to understand that there's a recurring fund from NOM to the laboratory.
Okay. One comment. I was glad to see that you brought something stuffed in here rather than something from Necrops in here.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Denise?
All right, you have my report,
and I wanted to share with you something that's new on our website. And just so you're aware of that, it's we have one of our, as you know, public affairs. That's what Jared and I do. This is a big we. Jared does a lot of heavy lifting here these days. But one of the things that one of the important functions that we have that can be quite challenging is animal care, and that area, the mission area that we have. We typically get a lot of emails on heavy web traffic on our animal laws page that we have online. And you can find that over here under rules.
We'd be happy to let some other species take that header.
Yeah, well, I'm working on that. I just haven't gotten there yet. So I'm planning on pulling down the avian influenza off the main page there. So I just haven't gotten that
Oh,
far.
that's a good one.
Yeah, well, we're going to try. So anyway, what we've had here for a very long time is an opportunity for folks to go onto our main homepage where it says animal welfare, dead animal. I can't drive and look up there. It's messing me up here. Dead animal complaints. And we've had an online complaint form where folks can go submit information, or they can just contact us directly and we get emails. And frequently, a lot of times what we have are emails and contacts coming in, and they're outside of our jurisdiction. While we care about animal welfare and there are state laws against collective abuse, the challenge is somebody's wanting to report the dog that's tied up next door and it's 90 degrees outside and no one's come out to feed it or pet it in 2 days. So what do? They contact us, but we just don't have the authority to go out on cases like that. They actually belong to local animal control or law enforcement is where it should go. So we're trying to redirect and get people more in touch with going there directly instead of contacting us, and then we have to send them back and say, thank you for contacting, but what you need to do is go here. So we made a significant change to the animal care and welfare page and trying to help get people routed to where they need to be to make their reports. And so working with our field staff, and Jared did a lot of the heavy lifting here on what goes behind this, but now you can click on your county and find out where can I report animal welfare issues that are dog, cat, those type of things. So we've made this very much interactive. If you happen to see this on a mobile device, you may not see the map, but you'll see this drop-down list, and so you can pick what county you're in. In some cases, we do have counties where there is more than one location that can even make a report, like in Putnam County. They have different ones here. So this is a new feature. We've also worked on consolidating some of the summaries of what the animal laws say. If you do need to report livestock, horses, poultry, that is here. And you can come down to the livestock, horse, and poultry section, and then you can click on the we have our frequently asked questions, and then that report form can drop you right there, and you can go through the process of making a report that goes directly to our folks who deal with compliance and enforcement. So that's a new feature that we have on our website, and we're hoping that it will cut down on some of, and I wouldn't call it a waste of time, but it's kind of frustrating for us and for the folks who are reaching out to us, and then we just have to redirect them. And so we hopefully get people where they need to be the first time they reach out is our goal here as well. So anyway, so that's some of the things, and these are just the categories, and they all drop down to give you an idea of what information you might want, who's regulating it. In the case of pet shops, nobody. And then we get other resource materials. So that's kind of the new landing page, and this is the page that gets a lot of traffic on our website from month to month. So wanted to share that with you that's new. Also, I did get asked in our staff meeting about another item under disaster preparedness, that we have an eclipse, total solar eclipse coming up in April next year. Anybody know about that? Anybody solar eclipse fans? That is coming up. That is a thing, and we've actually, the state has a website here. Their Homeland Security does with resources. Department of Natural Resources has. They've been selling out rooms at all the state park inns and that type of thing. But there is this eclipse that's coming is going to cut across the state of Indiana, and we're going to have total darkness across a big section of the state. That'll show you. That's the swath that it's going to take through here. And the closer you are to the center line of this. Right, my mouse on the screen up front and my mouse in front of me is on the same spot. The line that goes, basically Bloomington's going to be the epicenter of this total solar eclipse on the afternoon of April 8th next year. And they're going to have about 4 minutes and 23 seconds of total darkness. And then as you get farther away from that center line that runs east to west, it'll be a little bit less time and not quite as dark. But folks are going a little crazy trying to get places to stay, to come watch it, to experience it, be part of it. And we're here in the hotel rooms in Bloomington. We're running about $750 a night or something like that to come watch this thing. So the big fear is we're going to get, we're one of the heavily hit states this time, this go around, and they're expecting over 1 million people, visitors, to come into the state just to experience what's going on and watch this thing. I had actually directly an emergency management person from up a little farther north, it's a heavily Amish state, reach out to us and ask, what advice do we have for Amish communities? Because of horses on the road, and they're kind of afraid there may be some issues because there's a darkness period that's going to last, starting getting dark about 2:30 in the afternoon and run until about 4 o'clock. Some level of darkness, so they're worried about safety of buggies on the road, and then also horses possibly being a little inspired or some unusual animal activity, because we looked historically, Dr. Macy and I just tried to figure out what to advise people. And doing some Google searches, we found some unusual things where hippos get kind of wonky and during solar eclipse. So there's not a lot of knowledge about what happens, but animals can act a little unusual when there's suddenly total darkness in the middle of the day. And so we're putting together an advisory for law enforcement and emergency management in those heavily Amish communities, just advising people to keep your buggies off the road, at least during the dark period. So those are the fun things I deal with in community public affairs. So that's my report. I'm happy to take any questions or comments, feedback.
As most people here in the room are Purdue graduates, it's quite interesting that IU will be in the dark, which they always are anyway. So
This is a recording.
Nothing. Thank you, Denise. Okay, Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Just say a couple of words about the government shutdown, potential for a government shutdown. Congress is trying to pass a budget. Most of BOAH's operations are funded by state dollars, but we do have some cooperative agreements, and of course the poultry inspection program is close to a 50-50 share with the federal government. So, if there were to be a government shutdown, what would happen? The state budget agency is telling agencies, or at least Board of Animal Health, to continue with normal operations. In the past, when there has actually been a shutdown at the federal level, the meat inspection program has been considered an essential function, which continues without any delay or pause. So the main effect, I think, is that it just delays USDA being able to tell BOAH what our federal allocation will be for the fiscal year that began a couple days ago. So we've applied for funding for the federal fiscal year that we're now in, started October 1, but we don't yet know what the award will be, which is not unusual. We usually don't get that until later, but this will delay it even further. We've also requested some additional funds for the year that ended, fiscal year that ended September 30th. And of course, we haven't heard whether we'll receive those because the current allocation does not fund 50% of the base program for meat and poultry. And you've heard me talk about that every meeting for several now. We are very concerned about this current fiscal year in that regard. We're anticipating, without significant increase from USDA, significant deficit that we'll have to find state funds to cover. So we've reached out to the State Department of Ag, we've reached out to the NASDA, the National Association of State Departments of Ag, and other states with state inspection programs are having the same issue. And so NASDA may try to talk to some folks at the federal level and see what can be done there. So more to come on that, but in terms of the shutdown, that should not impact those operations in a significant way. But we'll see what happens. Other than that, you see my report. We have created 4 new positions as a result of the budget that took effect July 1. We're recruiting those. You met Isaac today. He's one of those filling one of those positions is the epidemiologist. We have 2 animal health specialist positions that are not new, but also posted. We have a poultry health specialist that's been posted. We think we have that one filled. We are looking for a poultry veterinarian, if you know anyone who might be interested. That one may take a little longer to fill, but so those are out and been posted, and we're making progress on that front. Other than that, do you have any questions for me?
Okay, so I think the last meeting, they, the federal reimbursed us for what was supposed to be the 50%, but they were short on it.
Yes.
And how long, have you heard anything new on that, or is that a possibility that that'll just never come?
Yeah, we have not heard the final allocation for the fiscal year 23 that ended September 30th. So we've requested additional funds there. I can't remember the exact number, roughly $140,000 or so. We have not heard whether they're going to provide any or all of that, any of that, or none of that. We probably won't know that. I don't know when we'll know that. In the past, it could be in October, or it could be in December, or it could be in March. I mean, it just depends on.
Have they ever shorted us from what their obligation was before, permanently, I guess, or?
Yes, it's not often, but it has happened, and it seems to be occurring more in recent history, and with the shortages are getting bigger. And like I said, that's not just Indiana, other states have had experience. It's a topic that the state directors are going to discuss with USDA at the upcoming United States Animal Health Association meeting. The state directors have a meeting there with USDA, so they'll bring it up there. But it's enough of an issue that other states, through their departments of ag, are trying to figure out what they can do with that. So we'll see where that goes. But you know, the shortage is only going to get bigger if they don't do something. Obviously, we've had some changes in the way that BOAH compensates its employees as part of the statewide restructuring of pay, so that's contributed to the Indiana deficit. But we're also, as Dr. Sir will report later in the meeting, you know, the program continues to grow, and you know, we're already at a point where we need additional people, but we're unable to do anything about that because we have this federal deficit. It's kind of hard to continue to add people to the program when 50% of their pay is unfunded. That makes it challenging. So that's all I can say today. We're continuing to work on it.
I think the other part to Gary's comments is there's been an aggressive effort on the part of the administration, the Biden administration and USDA, to support small and very small processors across the country. Large grant programs, et cetera. Our Department of Agriculture has been involved with those. The Indiana Meat Packers and Processors Association, with Tim and others, have been heavily involved. And so there's been a number of grant initiatives to support the plant side, but it's not inspection support. And so you can expand this and keep adding and building on it, and that's great, and we want to do all that, but we're at the point to say we don't have enough inspectors to cover that demand. So that's kind of the position we're in. On the one hand, it's encouraging to find out we're not the only state. On the other hand, it's discouraging to know that we've got a number of states that are in this conundrum as well. So we've got a number of things that have competing interests here right now. So we're, to your point, Tim, we're trying to figure out at what point we might get some relief, or whether this is the new look moving forward.
Have some of the states started a state program too, that may possibly throw another burden upon
They
us?
throw another burden. Oregon is the most recent one to have, and make it 29 in the country, maybe 29 states over 50 have state-based meat inspection programs. So to your point, there's going to be more requests for funds as states add themselves to that overall list. So yes.
In Arkansas,
I don't recall. It was Arkansas one as well. Yeah. So yes, you're correct. More states are adding. And then now we're seeing, if I understand correctly, we're seeing a growth and expansion here in Indiana, and it may be unique to other states' experience. I mean, we're seeing more here. I don't know exactly why all that more here, but even in states that are short, We're going to be shorter yet because of the significant demand. Dr. Searle will go into that. I think we're 139 plants now and more coming. But we're at the point we can't provide more inspection. And I know folks want it and certainly don't want to be in a position to deny people because without the inspection, they don't operate. And so suddenly you're out of business and it gets to be a tough spot very quickly.
We have 140 now.
140.
A couple days ago.
Couple days. It changed since we last met. So.
Any other questions for Gary? Okay. Dr. Shipman.
Sarah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think that happened last time.
I did that last time. Sarah, I really am not trying to.
Just one item I wanted to make you all aware of as far as preparations and work for the upcoming legislative session. You may recall in the last legislative session, there was a bill that dealt with sales of pups from pet stores. And so in Indiana, we have close to 20 cities or towns that have ordinances that prohibit pet stores from selling pups from breeders. And so what this bill in the last session did is it essentially preempted any future ordinances that prohibited pet stores from selling pups from breeders. And then it had a couple other components. It had additional requirements for breeders that are selling pups to pet stores. It had some consumer protection provisions in it as well, as far as disclosures to the purchaser and remedies to the purchaser if there was an issue with it with the pup. So that bill, it passed the Senate. It did not pass in the House. Did get a hearing in the House. And so as that all occurred in the last legislative session, this is an issue that has been in the forefront of some of the stakeholders, the Breeders Association, pet retailers in the state, certain legislators. And so they're looking at different ideas and proposals in the state as it relates to canine facility registration and regulation. So beyond just the pet stores, which were really the focus of the last session. So some of the proposals and discussions have circulated around enhanced breeder broker inspections, which are under our oversight. Obviously the pet stores and oversight of those, kennels, rescues, hobby breeders, animal care facilities, which would be your shelters and your animal control, impounding facilities, and humane societies. So there are a lot of discussions, and so what we have been doing is just as those different groups have requested objective and neutral feedback from the state agency, our agency, about fiscal impact or any neutral feedback on those proposals, we have provided that. So that's just a little bit of something that we expect to see a topic in the next legislative session.
Thank you, Sarah, and I apologize.
No worries.
Now, Kyle.
Thank you for having me. I will just touch a few highlights within the Animal Programs Division report, and then the rest of the team will fill in some details from there. So BOAH was fortunate to work with National Pork Board and Indiana Pork Producers Association to host here in Indianapolis an ASF response in the call, sow, and market hog industry. So this is an industry that generally gets overseen, but is vitally important to our traditional slaughter channels. So these are pigs that don't typically meet the normal specifications to go to a slaughter facility and get redistributed to packing facilities that can handle them. So wanted to take a look at the response activities and the preparedness efforts in that space and bring those decision makers to the table. I have to say it was one of the more meaningful meetings I've been to in a while, that had the correct people at the table to have the discussion, to get recommendations put in place so they can be effective in these marketing channels. Because trying to make the response activities that we normally do on a farm or normally do at a packing plant fit this specific industry would not work just straight off. So looking at what adaptations need to be made, and that was one of the big big things that came out of that. So we're incredibly excited to have that and have those people around the table. Also recently, we were able to host a certified swine sampler training actually at the Hardin Farm. So thank you, David, for having us there. We definitely appreciate your time. Also, we worked with Drs. Harker and Woods. They were there training us. So that was our BOAH team. 19 members of our BOAH team were able to go through the certified swine sampling training, which allows lay people to collect samples in a animal health emergency, specifically African swine fever, right? So when we would likely be out of the veterinary resources available during a ASF outbreak, if it was to occur in the country, this training is in place to assist and leverage the people who are generally on these farms on a day-to-day basis. So we wanted our team to be able to go through this process in case they need to be called upon to collect these samples. We also were recently awarded a USDA cooperative agreement funding to cover producer costs for obtaining genomically estimated breeding values for farmed white-tailed deer. So that funding was about $197,000. And what that does is that GEBV is a genetic metric of white-tailed deer in respects to the differences in susceptibility to chronic wasting disease. So it allows the producers to get this value, think of it as like a breeding value, right, that is quite heritable, that has shown to have the determination of some susceptibility to CWD. And so these producers can get this testing completed, look at and be strategic in the breeding within their herds and or call animals to increase or decrease the susceptibility of CWD in the herd. Indiana is currently CWD free, but this is a proactive measure that these producers can take. So we opened an enrollment window for this funding. So this funding was announced early September. We had an enrollment window that ended last Friday. Currently, we have 2,800 deer that are being requested for testing, and we have funding for 2,600. So we will work through that process of getting it to the 2,600 so we can get those deer tested. This is the first time we've had this funding stream, so we weren't sure what the uptake from the producers would be. And it seems to be a quite positive reaction. So we've likely already hit our budget amount just in the first enrollment window. We were planning additional enrollment windows, but so we are definitely encouraged by that. Myself and Dr. Whirling, who actually is at Purdue's Career Fair today, recruiting for us, are currently co-authoring a chapter in the upcoming issue of Veterinary Clinics in North America and the transboundary diseases of cattle and bison. Basically what this chapter looks at is the veterinarian's role in disease investigations in the initial response activities, as well as general considerations that are put into place for vaccine consideration during specifically F&V. So just taking a look at those pieces, we're excited to work with a co-author on the chapter who's actually based in Scotland currently and moving to Rome. So who's an expert in all things cattle TB. So, but has a lot of experience working in this space. On the sheep and goat section, as the federal fiscal year came to an end, Indiana was able to have sampled more than double the minimum quota for both sheep and goats as a part of the USDA's National Scrapie Eradication Program. This is a welcome turn of events where last year, if you remember, we were facing challenges in identifying the sample opportunities. And early on, we're seeing the challenges as well, but we're able to get that quota met and actually ended up doubling it. It's hard for us to directly impact that number outside of just recruiting producers and slaughter facilities that are slaughtering eligible animals to have those samples. So we were able to reach that surveillance for this federal fiscal year. 28 veterinarians and 11 veterinary clinics were trained to use the Vet CVI application this quarter. You may have recently received a notice from us saying that the Vet CVI is the new standard. It is replacing the eCVI, which is the traditional fillable PDF. The eCVI PDF is the technology behind it is actually getting phased out. So now we have the Vet CVI, which is compliant on Android, iOS, as well as Windows computers and tablets. So it is free. And so that's what we are migrating the eCVI users to. So there's a timeline that was outlined in the email, but we are working to getting that training up and going so that veterinarians have an additional option. There are other options out there for fee. What we see with the Vet CVI is a solution. If you want convenience, you're likely going to need to pay for it, right? So GVL is generally the most convenient, user-friendly application that's out there, but it is for a fee. The Vet CVI is a application that can stand in a free option, and we are working to continue to put more enhancements in it. Down the road, it will also have the ability for veterinarians to do brucellosis vaccinations as well as TB test charts within the application. And then the next iteration of that is to actually convert a TB test chart and a brucellosis vaccination into a CVI, all in one button, since you're already putting the animals in there. It does have the ability, because it's working through your phone, to connect to an all-flex RFID reader wand. So you can wand an animal and the IDs are coming onto your phone at the same time to generate that CVI. So just know that it's out there. We are pushing to get people off the eCVI because, again, that platform and that technology hasn't been supported in about 2 to 3 years, and we've kind of been dragging it along. And that's an Adobe thing. That's not a state of Indiana thing. So we were able to, through the state of Colorado, was able to put the initial money up for the Vet CVI application. Also, just wanted to highlight movement documents. We process a lot of movement documents. A lot of them are electronic, but they still require some processing. So this quarter we did process 10,580 movement documents across all species. Again, the paper ones are what take a lot of our time, right? Each paper one can take between 5 and 10 times the amount of time that it does for an electronic one to review and process. So they just take time. Generally, that's going to be imports. We do a really good job at sending great data to other people for our exports, but our imports from other states is generally where we get hit hardest with paper. And that is usually small animal and horses. There's some very routine movements that occur, and those have been captured in paper. It's always interesting to take a look at our mail because you see all the different pieces and parts that come in. We have very routine animal movements of dogs and cats from Alaska every week. And so it's just kind of interesting to see these random trends that you wouldn't expect. And then BOAH did receive 158 animal welfare related complaints or inquiries leading to 49 animal care investigations this quarter. Both of those reports are at the end in the Animal Programs Investigations Report, as well as summary tables that kind of highlight what those trends were this quarter. With that, I will take any questions over those sections.
So on that animal care investigation, with the changes in the website, I know that's something that's continually increased on your time demand.
Right.
Is that trend continuing, or is it, with the changes on efficiency, is it kind of maintaining?
So we saw a slight uptick previously, so because of how we're kind of coordinating these. And so the website is relatively new change, so we haven't seen that come down yet or even normalize. I'm not sure what our normal is right now because we've changed a few different pieces in there. The actual person who's coordinating the calls has changed recently, as well as website developments have changed. So up, down, I think we'll have to see our end of year number to see how that shakes out compared to last year. But as far as per quarter, it's pretty consistent. But we made some of these changes mid-quarter. So I think next quarter will be more telling.
So on the investigations, several of the complaints seem that it's the people we were referring people to contact us.
Yes.
You're not wrong.
Kyle, on the GEVV testing, is that blood, hair, or tissue?
Yes.
All any of the three.
The preferred sample is blood.
Okay.
Or antler. They can do, antler is not preferred, but of your samples, they can also do antler at an additional charge. Semen maybe as well. Yeah, so. Any other questions? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Strasser.
share with you today an overview of our equine programs here at BOAH. And so we'll go through a little bit of background information initially, to sort of give you an overview of where our horses are in the state. Although I have to admit, when I was looking, we don't have any very recent surveys and information about horses either in Indiana or in the United States. So 2017 was the last time the American Horse Council did an overarching survey of the horse industry. And at that time, they found 7.2 million horses in the United States. In the industry, generated about $102 billion annually, with about 3 million of those horses used for recreational purposes, so kind of backyard pleasure horses. And then about a little over 1 million show horses, and also a little over 1 million race horses. And then we come in at about 500,000 working horses. So that would include, horses that work on the farms with the Amish, as well as carriage horses, anything that you could imagine people might be using horses for, mounted police, things like that would go into that category. And they also found about that owners spent an average of 22 hours per week with their horses. But I imagine that varies quite a bit. Although I did survey some of my colleagues at the Board of Animal Health, and they said that was pretty close. So, so they weren't too far off. And as far as Indiana numbers, our horse farms and our horse owners are not required to have the premises registration like some of our other livestock are, but they can voluntarily register, and we have almost 11,000 farms registered that do include horses. So, so that's kind of a good ground level for us to imagine that they're out there, but I am sure there are a lot more. Backyard horse owners with 1 or 2 horses may not be as likely to have their horses registered with us. We do have 46 equine exhibition premises registered with the Board of Animal Health. And then, as we heard from Sarah earlier, 5 of our livestock markets routinely have horse sales. And then 4 additional markets have special sales throughout the year that focus on horses and other equids. We do have 2 sanctioned racetracks. And then in addition, I'm sure all of you are aware, the county fairs seem to all, a lot of them focus on standard bred racing, and a lot of them have some small racetracks there. And here at the state fairgrounds, we also have a racetrack. And so we have other racetracks around the state that are not officially sanctioned by the Indiana Horse Racing Commission. So there's a fair amount of race activity here in Indiana. We do additionally have 5 state parks that have saddle barns, so people can go to those state parks and rent a horse and go riding if they don't have their own. And then 600 miles of horse trails are touted on the DNR website. So there's plenty of opportunity to get out there and ride. All right, so looking at our equid movement numbers from 2022, we had a little over 6,000, well, 6,500 CVIs on horses coming into the state. And then it was sort of interesting to go through and break down those numbers and see what the purpose of that movement was. So they were coming in, about 1,500 of them came in as sale. So they were coming in for sale on these CVIs. And then almost 700 of them were coming in for competition or exhibition events. So it may be that those were coming in and then leaving and going back home. And then about 1,200 of them came in for racing. We do have a pretty vigorous racing industry. And so overall, on those 6,000 CVIs, we had 11,747 imported horses documented on CVIs in our system for 2022. Okay, so, and we'll talk a little bit more. There are some other ways that horses can come in not on those CVIs. But then turning that around and looking at the exports, we had 11,000 CVIs for horses being exported from the state, and almost 5,000 of those were sales. So horses leaving for sale, 600 of them were leaving for competition, exhibition, and likely coming back home. And altogether, we had about, 18,698 exported horses for one reason or another. They were leaving the state. So in addition, this, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see there were 430 inspections for extended equine CBIs. So that's the equine passport that allows horses to actually move for 6 months on one inspection. So those are a little bit harder to track, the actual movements of those horses. They get inspected once by a veterinarian during that period, and then it's up to the owners to document the movements of those horses. So there were 430 inspections, and then those horses could move during those 6 months as many times as they wish, on, back and forth to any states that accept those equine passports, with Indiana being one of those states. And the other thing with the CBIs, we do have a few horses that already routinely would come into sale barns, may not have CBIs, have the EIA paperwork, things like that. So there may be some of those that are not necessarily documented in the CBI system. So it's likely that the numbers of horse movements, especially coming in, are a little bit higher. All right, does anybody have questions on the background stats and some of those general numbers before we jump into some of the disease programs? I'm just going to go ahead and hit some of the highlights of diseases that we deal with and maybe have had some recent interesting cases. So equine infectious anemia is a lentivirus, and it's found pretty well worldwide, except Japan and Iceland. So it's a pretty ubiquitous disease. Now, clinical signs from EIA really vary. So these horses may be completely asymptomatic. There may be no sign that they have this disease, or they can range all the way to sudden death, where somebody walks out into their pasture and their horse is just dead. So this can be an acute or chronic disease. It can happen very suddenly, or this horse can have this disease for years and years, potentially exposing other horses along the way. So there's a possible prolonged incubation period. And when we find one of these horses, we have to keep that in mind so that any stable mates or pasture mates of that horse, we place those under quarantine as well as the horse of concern until we get all the testing done to make sure that it is a true positive. But we wait 60 days to test those exposed horses. And then that gives us some assurity that they got past that incubation period. And if they were indeed exposed and infected, we're going to catch them before we release that quarantine. And so this disease can be transmitted by vectors such as horse flies, deer flies. It can also be passed down from mares to their foals. And more recently, we're seeing mostly iatrogenic transmission. So that's people using tattoo equipment, dental equipment, needles, IV sets, things like that that are not changed out between horses or not sufficiently disinfected. So unfortunately, anytime there's a blood transmission from a horse that's infected to a non-infected horse, there is that risk. There are a couple of different tests for equine infectious anemia. One of those is the AGID test, or the Coggins test, as it's known in the horse world. And so that's, most people will just say, do you have your Coggins papers? And that means, is your horse tested for EIA? And then the other test that is out there is an ELISA test. And there are actually several different ELISAs that test for EIA. The US program to control EIA actually began back in 1972. So it's been around for a while. And just some more recent numbers. In the US, we've tested, and we typically every year test over 1 million horses. Part of this is because most states and a lot of individual venues require a Coggins test or testing for EIA before they allow horses into their event or into their state. So a lot of testing happens. It was a little bit increased in 2021. And I think maybe more people were getting outdoors and moving with their horses when they couldn't do some of the indoor activities. So that might possibly be why we saw that little increase in testing. As far as positive horses, unfortunately, we've had pretty stable numbers for a little while, kind of those mid double digits. And then suddenly in 2021 and 2022, they've kind of jumped a little bit higher. And a lot of that is linked back to that iatrogenic transmission, unfortunately. And we're actually seeing that more in the quarter horse racing world. Some of those horses are not always raced on sanctioned tracks. And so there's not a lot of oversight in the treatment that goes with those horses. So we sometimes end up with blood transfer between those horses that becomes problematic and then transmits diseases to other horses. So this map here just kind of gives an overview where we tend to see equine infectious anemia popping up in the United States. And all those yellow states that you see just have one case. And so it's pretty easy for Indiana to end up as one of those yellow states. It happens from time to time where we might have 1 or 2 cases pop up, but we don't typically get a lot of cases like they might have in Texas, Arizona, California. EIA is endemic in Mexico. So where there's a lot of movement of those horses particularly, it's easy to show up in the states if they're, if they don't go through appropriate quarantine procedures and things like that coming in. And then any of the states that have a lot of horse movement also are at risk of having these positive EIA cases in their states. So here in Indiana, we haven't had any positive true Indiana horses in the last 3 years. So, and the reason I say true Indiana horses is we actually have had one this year that tested positive, but it had only been in Indiana for about 2 days when we found it. So it came from Illinois and it came here to a breeding facility run by a veterinarian. The veterinarian astutely saw that this horse did not come in with a negative EIA test and said, we're going to test it before it even gets off the trailer, put it in an install in his barn, kind of in his own little isolation area. And that test came back positive. So we were notified right away, contacted the owners, worked through that case. That horse was euthanized. It actually happened before we had gotten to fly season. So we weren't worried about vector transmission. And under this veterinarian's care, we were certain there was no iatrogenic transmission. He was very careful, testing his horse immediately, isolating it from the rest of his horses. So the rest of the horses at that facility did not have to be placed under quarantine. So that was a good thing. And we've seen that happen in a couple of cases with different diseases where very astute people go ahead and test horses when they come in and then kind of keep those horses isolated or quarantined in their facility and don't expose the rest of their horses. And so it prevents them from having a quarantine on a large number of horses for a lengthy amount of time. So that was a good way to go. In that case, that veterinarian was really on top of things. So we also have had a positive horse, a single positive horse for EIA in the years 2019, 2018, and then back in 2016. So the 2019 and 2018 horses were associated with quarter horse racing. The 2016 horse was just a horse that came in from another state, hadn't been tested on the way in. We figured out that he was lacking papers, had to go through the quarantine process with a pretty large number of horses in that case. But yes, it follows a national trend where we're seeing this iatrogenic transmission kind of revolving around typically horses coming in from Mexico because a lot of those are infected, and then not careful use of those horses, and then transmission to other horses that are exposed to them. Okay, we're going to kind of jump to another disease here that's different, but kind of linked epidemiologically to the EIA cases, and that's equine piroplasmosis. These are 2 bloodborne protozoa, Tyleria equi and Babesia cabali, can cause equine piroplasmosis. And the only places where these parasites are not endemic are the US, Canada, Australia, Japan, and Iceland. So it's close to worldwide, but there are a few little islands where we don't have piroplasmosis. And the US doesn't have it, so it's considered a foreign animal disease, but it does pop up from time to time. And Indiana we've seen our share of piroplasmosis positive horses, unfortunately. Again, like the EIA horses, typically associated with those quarter horse race horses. And again, similarly, these can be transmitted by vectors. So these are actually transmitted by ticks or iatrogenic uses, just like all of the EIA with the dental equipment, the needles and IV sets, and tattooing equipment. And then equine piroplasmosis can potentially be transmitted in utero from the mare to the foal, but not as typically as EIA, although it can happen. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. Again, with this disease, clinical signs vary from asymptomatic to sudden death. And so the sudden death horses, when that happens, they're really not exposing anybody else. But it's these asymptomatic horses that are out there and have the potential to infect a large number of horses. Again, they tend to be linked to those race horses that are not raced on sanctioned tracks. And the way that we catch some of those is a lot of our quarter horse racetracks have started having requirements for pyroplasmosis testing. And in Indiana, our track that races quarter horses has those requirements in place. And that's one of the ways that we tend to find them and have positives here in Indiana. They oftentimes are not Indiana horses, but they come here in preparation for racing at our track, get tested by the trainers, or just, you know, in order to have their test to get into the racetrack, and then they're found positive. So testing for pyroplasmosis occurs at NVSL, and now we have NOM labs in 11 states, including here in Indiana, that also test for pyroplasmosis. So it's nice to have that laboratory capacity, and it's pretty quick that we get results back. So there was a big 2009 equine pyroplasmosis outbreak at a Texas ranch, and that generated a lot of infected horses. And while that was bad, it also led to a treatment protocol being developed by the USDA. And so equine pyroplasmosis positive horses now have the option of being treated, and they are not required to be euthanized. Since that point, there have been 585 non-related horses, not related to that Texas ranch outbreak, that have been positive for equine pyroplasmosis in the United States. 58 of those have been dual infections with EIA. So that's why I say these kind of follow a similar trend. And we always sample, if we're sampling for pyroplasmosis, we also sample for EIA just to make sure, because there's a decent chance they might be linked with those two infections. Again, these days we're primarily seeing iatrogenic spread, especially here in Indiana. Down south, there are ticks down there that can still transmit this disease, but here in Indiana, that's very unlikely. And it's mostly associated with unsanctioned racing, and IV use in these horses is typically how we think that it's transmitted. And at the Board of Animal Health, we've actually put up posters at the sanctioned racetracks, because some of these folks actually kind of cross venues. So they'll race at the sanctioned racetracks, and then maybe have other horses that they race that are not sanctioned, or maybe some of those same horses will later go on to unsanctioned racing, or they do both. And so we're trying to get the word out to those populations of people that race those horses that they're really hard to reach out to. But we want to spread the word. They don't know that they can't reuse those IV sets, and that just rinsing out that IV tubing isn't good enough. And that's how they're spreading this infection among their horses. I think a lot of them know to change needles, but they keep reusing those IV sets. So we're trying to get that word out to them by putting out posters at the racetracks. And then whenever we do have a positive case, we say, tell all your friends, right? Tell your cohorts at the racetracks that we don't know about, or that we don't, that we're not routinely present, and let them know that they need to change those. It's not worth that little cost savings to risk the life of your horse by reusing those. So there is that treatment protocol, but it's pretty extensive, and it involves a very lengthy quarantine, usually over a year, until they actually test positive or until they test negative after treatment. So here in Indiana, what we've seen since 2009, we've had 12 equine pyroplasmosis positive horses that were not related to that Texas ranch outbreak. And back in 2011, one was actually B. cavalli positive. So we don't see those very often. Usually we see the Theileria equi parasite. But that one was a positive quarter horse racehorse, and it was euthanized. In 2017, we had 7 of these T. equi positive quarter horse racehorses. 5 of them were unsanctioned racehorses. So they didn't race at the official tracks, and the owners opted just to euthanize those. They didn't want to go through the treatment protocol, and that was their call. So they euthanized those. There were 2 horses, however, that had some links to unsanctioned racing, but they raced on sanctioned tracks. And that owner opted to go ahead and treat those horses. Both of them went through the treatment and eventually tested negative and were released from quarantine. More recently, in 2019, we had 2 T. equi positive racehorses, and they were both unsanctioned type quarter horses, but the owner was kind of dabbling at getting into the sanctioned racing. And so he was working to get his mares to some nice breeding facilities and maybe come up with some horses that he was going to be racing at some of these sanctioned tracks. And in the process of getting her ready to go to this breeding farm, he tested and then found the one positive horse, which led to finding another positive horse in his barn. And unfortunately, one of those horses came down with a strange illness that we do not believe was related to the piroplasmosis and was eventually euthanized, although he underwent a lot of treatments and just really didn't recover. The other one went through his whole treatment regimen and then tested negative and was released for quarantine. Most recently, here in 2022, we found a racehorse that came in for training at a trainer that was getting him ready to go to the track. This trainer, kind of like the veterinarian that we talked about with the EIA horse, when this horse came in, he didn't have a piroplasmosis test. That's not unusual. Usually they get it just before they're getting ready to go to the official racetracks. And when he tested this horse, he was positive. He was positive at levels that were high enough that we were confident that this horse had not been infected at the trainer's barn. And he had only been at the trainer's barn for about a week. So we questioned the trainer pretty intensively over any work that had been done with this horse, any practices, whether they had done any tattooing or anything like that, that we might worry about. There might be some iatrogenic blood transmission. And there was nothing in that history. Because of the timing and how far this horse was from being actually raced, we were pretty certain that there was no transmission there. So he was another one of those farms that was able to escape that quarantine of his whole facility. And just this individual horse was quarantined. The owner actually decided to go ahead and treat that horse. So we moved him to a quarantine facility under a BS 127. So he was one of those that moved under a restricted movement form in a sealed trailer. And he was treated there. When we were doing the epidemiology, trying to figure out where he had gotten infected, we found that his dam was infected. So that mare tested positive, and this colt he was young. He was just barely 2 years old, just getting started in his training. This was the first time he had been off his home farm that only had the mare and one other horse. It was actually a filly that was related to him, his older sister. And so we're pretty certain that this horse was infected in utero from this mare. So that's one of those very rare in utero transmission infections of piroplasmosis. And we were able to deduce that because his numbers on his test were very high. So he had been infected for quite a length of time. And it's likely because the dam was positive that it was transmitted in utero. But we treated him and he served out his quarantine, actually was allowed to go back home. His home farm was in Illinois. So we have a lot of these quarter horse racehorses that come from Illinois. They like that northwestern corner of Indiana. And he's at his home farm, kind of waiting out his days, getting close to the end of his quarantine. So his numbers are nearly negative, and then he will be done. The mare, unfortunately, the owner opted to euthanize her. So we don't have any horses under those piroplasmosis quarantines related to the quarter horse racing anymore. All right, so we're going to jump to the next disease, the equine herpes virus myeloencephalopathy. EHV1 and EHV4, the equine herpes viruses, are the potential causes of this disease. Typically, it's EHV1. So most horses are vaccinated for this. This is in the standard vaccines that every horse owner gives once or twice a year. Show horses are often vaccinated much more often than that. But vaccination does not prevent this neurologic form of this disease from occurring. It is a herpes virus, so any sort of stressful incident tends to precipitate the potential for a recrudescence. So we see this disease pop up again under stressful situations for these horses. And it's really a disease that focuses on the vascular system, and you end up with this vasculitis or inflammation of the blood vessels and thrombitis, and then infarction or damage to the CNS, the central nervous system vasculature, and you end up with neurologic signs. These horses have pretty severe neurologic deficits in most cases. Transmission can vary. It can be respiratory, so horses in a barn sharing the same airspace can transmit this disease. There can be direct contact from nasal secretions, and just horses being near each other can spread this disease, and then also indirect transmission. So if people are kind of like strangles. If they're, having a hose that touches everybody's water buckets and things like that, grooming equipment, anything like that can also potentially spread this from horse to horse. Interestingly, mules and donkeys can be silent shedders. So in barns that have various types of equid present, those mules and donkeys can be infected and heavily shedding this virus and show absolutely no clinical signs. So that can be kind of a red flag when we get one of these outbreaks going on. Again, with this disease, there's a little variability to the incubation period, but it's usually about 24 hours to about 1 week. So not extremely long, but long enough to expose a lot of horses, unfortunately. There have been several large outbreaks across the US in recent years in quite a few states, and this is just a sampling of states that have had some kind of notable large number horse outbreaks. And those typically tend to be at big events that are recognized, and the horse industry quickly finds out about them, and then can have repercussions because those horses tend to travel on circuits and are traveling through different states, and it really affects those types of exhibitions, whatever they are, whatever those shows are, whether it's a reining competition, and then all the other reining competitions kind of get affected. With horses not being able to compete, horses being kept from shows sometimes shutting down. We see a lot happening with this disease on the show circuits. In 2012, we had 2 reported cases in Indiana. Those horses were identified pretty quickly and euthanized, and there was no further spread in the barns that they were in. So they were kind of one and done. Those cases were over. Unfortunately, in 2022, we had 2 more cases occur in Indiana, and one of those turned into a large outbreak. It was a 40-horse sporting stable, and there were a lot of different owners. Many of them had older horses. The index case was not immediately identified and removed. So I think that was the key to this one. And we ended up with a lot of horses infected. 25% of the horses in that barn were actually infected with this disease. And unfortunately, they all presented with neurologic signs. So that's not always the case, and it's not necessarily typical. And a lot of these large outbreaks, we'll see a few neurologic horses, but we'll see a lot of horses with respiratory signs or maybe just spiking fevers. And in this case, none of these horses showed fevers. They just all presented with neurologic signs. And the managers at the boarding barn got very adept at identifying these horses early on. So they would see just tiny little differences in gait and say, oh, that horse, there's something wrong. We need to isolate it. And they would pull that horse out and isolate it. And a few hours later, it would start showing overt neurologic signs, but they had been exposed. And so even though they were pulling those horses out, it didn't seem to make much of a difference to the infection. So they ended up with 25% of those horses infected, and unfortunately 5 of them were euthanized. I think 1 more may have been euthanized later down the road because it had these neurologic deficits that it retained and wasn't recovering from. 3 of those surviving affected horses actually took approximately 60 days to finally test negative before they were released from quarantine. They were able to be moved off-site to a new quarantine facility with no other animals, so the barn was allowed to go back up and start running after an appropriate disinfection before that 60 days. But that was a long time for those horses to be quarantined. And that was definitely an unfortunate situation for that barn. Now, just real quick, I'm going to close on the equine arboviruses. So these are the viruses that are transmitted by mosquitoes and affect our horses. So both West Nile and Eastern equine encephalitis virus are present here in Indiana at any given time, and they depend on those mosquitoes for transmission. But horses are dead-end hosts, just like humans. And it's interesting, even working with some of the folks at the health department, they tend to think that horses are a risk for people coming down with one of these diseases. And so I think our veterinarians get out there to some of these health department meetings and do a pretty good job of trying to educate those folks so they're not spreading that information that horses don't spread these diseases, they come from mosquitoes. But horses are dead-end hosts just like humans, so they can be out there like sentinels. They're the canary in the coal mine for these diseases because horses are out in their pastures all the time, where people are just out there, periodically, and likely don't have that high exposure to mosquitoes that the horses do. However, a lot of our horses are now vaccinated. So the vaccinated horses are pretty well protected. against these diseases, and those vaccinations are pretty effective. So, but the Board of Animal Health actually has a program where we encourage people to get their horses tested. If they're showing neurologic signs, a veterinarian comes out and finds that the horse is showing neurologic signs that are compatible with West Nile virus or Eastern equine encephalitis virus, to get them tested and report those to us. That works through the private veterinarians. It's in the northern part of the state, kind of those northern couple tiers of counties, where we typically tend to see these viruses most often. And there's a reimbursement program that pays for that testing. So it ends up being free to the owner because the veterinarian doesn't have to pay the lab fees, and even the shipment fees for the sampling are covered in that program. So we do encourage sampling. It's just a way to help out our health departments, and they make decisions then, if we can find these early enough in the season, whether they want to start some mosquito control programs in their counties. And you might think, well, it's a no-brainer to control mosquitoes, right? We want that to happen. But then you have people with organic farms and honeybees, and there are a lot of other impacts to take into consideration. So it's not a decision that they take lightly, but those horses help them make that decision if we get some positives early in the summer. Typically, we see this late summer to fall. When we see these two diseases, mortality rates tend to be a lot higher with EEE than they are with West Nile virus. So about a third of our horses end up dying or being euthanized with West Nile virus, but between 75 and 95% of the EEE horses usually die or are euthanized. So that disease is a little more devastating in terms of mortalities. So this is just a map of the United States and what our distribution pattern looked like for West Nile virus and EEE in 2022. The orange circles are the EEE cases, and the green circles are the West Nile cases. So you can see it's pretty well spread across the United States. Places that we think of kind of as hotbeds for mosquito activity in 2022 tended to have more EEE cases, but it really varies by year. And any year that you look at it, it varies a little bit, and you'll see different patterns arising. A lot of it depends on climate and which mosquito species tend to be more prevalent. 2022, these were our infections in Indiana. We had 3 of those Eastern equine encephalitis virus cases up in northern Indiana, and then we had 2 West Nile cases. Kind of an interesting distribution that we had one lower down. We tend to see these where horses are not vaccinated, right? When we have large vaccinated populations of horses, it's hard to say what's out there, and most horses don't show clinical signs because the vaccinations are very good. So a lot of times our Amish communities tend not to vaccinate their horses. So we might see, it looks like there's a higher incidence in those parts of the state, but it really kind of reflects the vaccination status of the horses as well. And then here over the last 3 years, it's interesting, in 2021, and then so far this year in 2023, we have not seen Eastern equine encephalitis pop up. And that's been great, because every time I get reports on those, it seems like we end up with a dead horse. We've had West Nile back in 2021, we had 8 cases. 2022, we had 2, and then this year so far, we've had 4. But those are kind of the levels that they run at. So not huge high levels. Since people have started vaccinating for West Nile in particular, we've really seen a drop in these cases. Excuse me. And that's really all I have. Does anybody have any questions on any of these diseases or programs?
Dr. Strasser, thank you for being politically correct in how you've handled some of these things. And some of the factual things for people who don't understand the non-sanctioned tracks. You'll have people who say this horse is really good and won a race last week, so this horse has good blood. So they will remove the blood from that horse and put that blood into another horse who is a lower caliber horse, predicting that this horse could win then. So we have the transfer of blood through needles, syringes, etc., and the blood is contaminated. And that's how a lot of that is done, is through uneducated use of things that shouldn't be done.
Yes, exactly. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Looks like we're going to the birds.
Cop is gonna start us off, if that's okay with you.
Well, you saw Denise's website, the whole website. We're trying to get out of the headliner, you know, from that standpoint. We do have some good news. Good news. As of the first of last month, we're able to officially declare in Indiana, at least, our 2022-23 HIPATH outbreak is now officially closed. So thanks for all the work, especially of our producers, our companies, the great staff at Purdue ADL, our dedicated staff. 577 days since our first diagnosis. Of course, we were first in the nation. You know, we're first in everything. We're first in a lot of things in Indiana, but didn't want to be first case, but that was in February of 2022. And now finally we can say with our Posey County backyard flock that completed its 120-day fallow period that we've closed that event. So again, of course, we're always on alert, as we know from Purdue ADL. Just this past Saturday, 212 pheasants reported dead out of 551 on a farm near Fort Wayne for raised release pheasants. Dr. Cooper, of course, called our district vets, got a relay of that samples across the state of Indiana to the Purdue ADL, called them in on Saturday because they had run that test and negative. Ooh. No, so we weren't trying to be first and last here again. From that standpoint. However, the efforts continue. The threat is still out there. You know, we talk about the threat still out there in our wild bird populations in the United States. Of course, we had over 7,000 detections in wild birds since we started this in 2022. We've just, as of the end of September, found mallards in Virginia positive as wild birds. And in the rest of the country, 25 other wild bird detections in Alaska and Connecticut. Of course, this is a low time for Fish and Wildlife and DNR to be taking samples. So that's a reflection of just a low number. But again, Virginia, there it is. And then coast to coast, right? This is the outbreak we've never really seen before where it's been in mammals. And I'm talking about carnivores, omnivores, and sea mammals. You wouldn't think a bottlenose dolphin in Florida would get HIPATH AI. But it got it because it must have been playing with some gull or something else that was infected and it's positive. Well, continues there, never seen it. 16 different types of mammals, what we've never seen before in the history of avian influenza in the United States. We're up to 205 detections across 26 states. And just 19th of this past month, harbor seals in Washington State, coast to coast. Virginia to Washington State. So we know that virus is still out there from that standpoint. We're holding here right now at 140 AI infected premises. It's 58.8 million poultry depopulated. And only 3 states, West Virginia, Louisiana, and Hawaii, are not reporting either a poultry or non-poultry case. I don't know. I'm sure they have some birds in Louisiana and West Virginia that maybe have some poultry there that maybe got infected, but like some of our cases that just had 7 birds on the premise and they all died. Well, don't take a diagnostic lab, we'll never will know from that standpoint. So, well, will it end? Will it end? That's what Kai and the rest of our poultry producers keep asking. Will it end? Will it end? I don't know. Luckily, fortunately, from a commercial premise standpoint, we haven't had any cases in 5 months. All right, non-poultry or backyard premises over 4 months. All right, well, we get to our live bird markets, which we have in the United States. You know, where we jackpot these backyard or small flocks or some of our spent brown egg layer, organic layers in northern Indiana that will go to a New Jersey live bird market where you can go in that live bird market, whether it's under an underpass or in a small shop or whatever, and buy that bird live, they process it, and then hand it back to you as a processed bird. Now, as part of the exemptions that are in there existing, they're red meat, you can't do that with hog, can't do with cattle, can't do with sheep and goat, but you can do that with a bird. And that's part of our situation where we have some of our people that want to buy those birds, and those are red birds. once they get to New York. They leave as brown egg layer organic birds in India, and they become a red bird because they like, actually, white birds they don't really like. They want, most of the populations there that are buying this bird want a colored bird. They want, and actually the best kind is actually a black bird with black skin. That'll get you most money because that's what they're used to from some of the countries they come from. So they like to buy that bird. So last month, basically we had our case in New Jersey live bird market, and that was just in 15th of this month. We also had, before that time, in July and August, we had 3 New York live bird markets that were positive. So again, that virus is still out there, whether it be wild birds, mammals, or live bird markets. And of course, we try to do tracing. Now, it's tough to get that ear tag in a bird. Now, we'd actually for historically purposes, I can talk a lot about history, but people say, Dr. Capo, no, he's going to tell another history story. But we actually tried to do identification of birds, go into the live bird market. The guy had a great idea. I don't know if I have never told this story because even Dr. Marsh may not know. So the idea was they were going to take these like small micro tags. They're going to take a pen of birds and spray it on birds. And you can only see these tags under black light. And then once you got the live bird market, they turn positive. You can take that bird under black light and see it. Well, guess what? These birds are all put together, jackpotted together, and put in cages. Well, those birds have a tendency to rub on each other. So you couldn't get those tags, those sticky tags got all over all the birds. So it really didn't work. We tried that. We tried to ear tag the best we could with this kind of system. So it's out there, and again, worldwide, still out there. What are we heading into? Of course, World Organization of Animal Health clearly shows as they study it over time that, hopefully it should have gone away. So it did in 2015. Now we're still in the largest animal health event in the history of the United States. We passed 2015 with the number and the time. Normally it's supposed to, okay, fall migration, those wild birds move in, they expose our poultry. Spring, we get all our outbreaks, goes down summer, kills that virus, right? It's kind of like human influenza. Okay, everybody's clean. Didn't happen. We had the spring, then went down, went back in the fall, it's back up in the spring. It went down, but we still know that virus out there. Well, guess what? Month of September, Canada has now reported 5 commercial and non-commercial premises with H5N1. Well, those birds are going to come home here, fall migration. Keep on alert, Ty. Keep on alert that way. So Mexico, of course, had a flock in August. Further south, 6 South American countries in the month of September reporting cases. And guess what? Galapagos Island, the blue-footed booby, is out. Actually, we've been positive there in Galapagos Islands AI. So it's not even, you can go to Hawaii, any other place. Hawaii, you can still go to. That's actually a state we have. I just put it that. But other islands don't go South America. That's the point. Europe, 14 countries reporting in the last month of the World Organization of Animal Health, and then Middle East and Asian countries. Well, should we try vaccination, right? We do it in humans. Well, they try to come up with the strain keeps moving on, so that's part of the problem. And France is now trying it. They mandated just this month that all ducks raised for meat production will be vaccinated. Well, what do the rest of the countries do? And this is why we're hesitant to do it too. So Canada decided right away, oh, wait a minute, we're going to suspend importation of all live poultry, hatching eggs, raw, fresh, frozen products originating from France, effective October 1st. Well, trying to manage the potential risk to France, from France for hypothiae. Also then, USA, we decided too, we're going to place restrictions on the importation of poultry from France, as well as live ducks, duck eggs, and then also include European poultry trade region, as well as Iceland, Switzerland, Norway, only excluding Great Britain. We're trying to prevent that risk of an introduction in the United States because with that vaccine, kill vaccine, just might mask that disease, we still might have a threat. So vaccine, I don't know. We look at it, but it's still a challenge when we look at the import-export type market. So that's all on high path AI and going to egg drop. That's okay, wait for it. So good news on egg drop from that standpoint. It's been 3 months since we had any of our cases. We only had 2 back in June, and that was basically when we ran out of vaccine. This is one vaccine that works good. The vaccine's very good. But you know where we're getting it? We're getting from Hungary and Spain. That's where we get import. We don't have any current U.S. produced vaccine because when I graduated from college, it was a foreign animal disease. It's been foreign animal disease for up to almost 3 years ago when Pennsylvania got it, and then we got it, and then Michigan now has it. So from that standpoint. But those birds that broke in June, where we had been in a space of 6 months where we didn't have a case, that's when we ran out of vaccine. So there was reports that, you know, they may not have got vaccinated as well as they should have. So that's it. So we haven't had any cases the last 3 months. We're still trying to get that vaccine in. We just reported with our Poultry Health Advisory Council meeting on Friday. SEBA is continuing to try to get that vaccine in. We're working on our doses from actually April of this past year. Hopefully we can get around to the next year and get some more in here. Merck is working on it. They got some doses in. We're trying to get some more in there. And some good news too also is NVSL has now made a genetic sequence of it and an EDS isolate for research. Vet Biologics is accepting applications for any licensing and permitting, and SEBA is still trying to work on creating a U.S.-based vaccine, but it's a hard disease to isolate and use because they need a fresh isolate. Some of our Northern Indiana companies, we have 3 companies that are vaccinating, and some of the other companies that aren't infected yet are still asking for possible permission to use that vaccine, but we have to manage that against the supply because we don't want to run out like we did before. Well, then finally, some sad news. I guess you're supposed to end on a good note. I don't know, but it's this way it goes. Tyson, of course, announced this month of October, 3 plants are closing in the U.S. North Little Rock, Knoll, Missouri, and Dexter, Missouri. And a 4th location, our Corydon plant, is expected to be closed on March 1st of next year. So we have basically about 63 facilities and production farms associated with that Corydon, Indiana plant. There's, of course, the processing plant, the hatchery, the feed mill. We have 42 Indiana producers that are going to be affected by that, whether it be breeding producers or meat producers from that standpoint. Of course, that plant is right in downtown Corydon. It's backed right up to Indiana Creek there. And to actually get, if you've ever been to the plant or down through Corydon, there's a bridge where a lot of time that creek is overflowed. You got to drive your car right through the low end of the creek there. And of course, our housing, and they're backed up to the housing, no room for expansion. However, this for Tyson plant, this was our northernmost plant for Tyson. Basically, the complex has always been rated by AgriStats very high and efficient, and some of the least cost of any of their other plants. But it's still going to be closed because it's one of their smallest plants too. Of course, part of their efficiency was due to the adequate grain supplies that our Indiana producers produce. But again, that plant will be closing. And of course, they're looking to other poultry companies in the area, whether they can raise birds for them, and Department of Ag is working with them as well as others. So hopefully we'll see someone take those producers for other production, poultry production. That's my report, Mr. Chair, unless there's any question.
Okay. It's never good to follow this guy. I don't have quite as much. Well,
I can retire.
No. No thanks. Trying to hold on to him as long as we can.
I made my 40 today.
Yeah. This day 40 years ago, Dr. Kopp started at the Board of Animal Health, so he'll get celebrated at the next board meeting. I actually am just going to update quickly on 2 cases that I reported on, or 2 outbreaks, I guess, that I reported on at our last board meeting. So one of those being infectious coryza. That is a respiratory disease of chickens that is caused by Aviobacterium paragallinarum, which is a bacteria. It's actually not a regulatory disease in Indiana. The reason that we even became involved is that, and so this is kind of a local outbreak centered around Jay County in Indiana, Mercer County in Ohio. And so it's been affecting both states. And the reason that we've been involved is because in some of the initial cases, before they really knew what for sure what they were dealing with, the mortality was so high that they were calling upon us to say, hey, we need to rule out avian influenza to make sure that's not what we're dealing with. The other issue that they ran into is that the demand for the vaccines, which are efficacious, but unfortunately that demand is more than there is supply at this time. There's back orders that are already promised across the country. And so where we came in then was allowing in Indiana for veterinarians that are working for these companies to produce an autogenous vaccine. So they take some of the isolate from the birds and have a pharmaceutical company make a vaccine out of that. It's a kill bacterin. Then we ran in, so we allowed that, we approved that. Unfortunately, one of the companies struggled with the final product. So, I mean, there's a lot of rules and regulations that go into producing one of these products. And so purity testing and those types of things at the end come into place. So they were really close. And then suddenly there was an issue, I think a contaminant of some sort, and then they weren't able to ship those, however, 5 million doses or whatever. So they started again. And so creating an autogenous product takes about 6 to 12 weeks on a good day. And this is this particular pathogen, this strain of this pathogen has not been growing super well, so they struggled with that again. So we ended up having to do some sharing across the border between Ohio and Indiana, but just letting you know that infectious coryza in that area of our state, kind of east central there around Jay County, where we have quite a few layers, is affecting at least 3 companies that we are aware of, and vaccine supply continues to be a challenge. So they're still battling, and late Friday night, there was finally another shipment from another company of product that was making it for another company in the country. So that's the update on infectious coryza. The other, last time I kind of told you about an outbreak of Mycoplasma gallisepticum in a breeder turkey flock, which we had not had in Indiana since 2000. The year 2000. And so we have Mycoplasma gallisepticum diagnosed in certainly backyard flocks on a fairly routine basis, as well as some commercial, like occasionally commercial cases, meat birds. But Indiana, through the National Poultry Improvement Plan, is an MG clean state for turkeys. And so, that's through our breeder turkeys being free of that disease. So it was diagnosed on a farm in Boone County. It was managed extremely well by the company. They had, what was fortunate, because this can be spread onto offspring, is that this was a pretty young flock when it was diagnosed. And so there was 17,000 hatching eggs at their hatchery, but fortunately none had become poults. None of them were on the ground as babies. And so they euthanized the hatching eggs at the hatchery. They destroyed any of the remaining eggs that were at the farm, and they quickly processed about 14,000 hens. There was only one of 6 barns of breeders that were infected, but the whole premises went. Tried to do an investigation to determine where did it come from. Kind of unsuccessful in that, to be honest. They had very close neighboring breeder complexes. They monitored those weekly using drinker swabs and running PCR on those drinker swabs at ADDL. They, were even looking at small flocks in the area, kind of doing an epidemiological investigation that way. We sent the strain down to the Poultry Research Diagnostic Lab in Georgia, and because the last time this happened in 2000, the strain was a new strain. It was actually a finch strain, a strain that had been known just to be in finches and crossed to turkeys. So we weren't sure what we were going to get this time, and it was just a wild type in the region type of a strain. So nothing too fancy, and so that's kind of the end of the story, except for we don't know where it came from and probably won't. That's what I got. Am I missing anything, Dr. Cobb?
Well, that finch strain was first time ever found in the United States in commercial turkeys, so we're first in a lot of stuff, thanks to our poultry industry diagnostic lab and our staff. We look forward.
Thank you, I guess.
It's all because you got it.
For swine,
Yeah, so I provided a few updates in my report. Dr. Marsh is going to touch on a few additional ones, and if you have any questions, we can get those to Dr. Whirling afterwards.
okay, Dr. Sharp.
Thank you, Chairman and Board. We have a few quarterly highlights. I reported that we had 7 new plants join the program this quarter. 2 new facilities started under inspection, custom exempt, that increased their inspection for slaughter and processing. And then 5 new custom exempt facilities. We actually had 6 new custom exempt facilities. We had 1 join us just the end of last week. And after I'd already submitted the board report. So last year we had a total of 11 new plants. And in the first 9 months of this year, we've had 30 new facilities and owners, which has broken the record that we broke last year. Dan Doles, one of our EIAOs, auditors, he held a HACCP training session on September 20th for 6 of our inspectors. He is going to continue holding these every quarter to keep our inspectors, not only our new inspectors, but also our experienced inspectors updated on HACCP training. Also that I did not have here on the report, we hosted a group from the Dominican Republic that was visiting Purdue. They are trying to develop a new meat inspection program and wanted to model it after Indiana's program. Some fast facts about our facilities. We currently have 80 official establishments, and that does include processing as well as slaughter facilities. And we have 3 limited permit retail HRIs, which is a poultry exemption. They are exempt from inspection as long as they raise the poultry themselves and process them themselves. And then we have a total of 57 custom exempt facilities right now, leading to 140 total establishments in our program. We currently have 1 open inspector position in the Northeast area that we are conducting interviews with some possible inspectors. Elmer Clancy, the supervisor in the Northeast area, is retiring the end of November. And Jamie Wolf, one of our inspectors in the area, has been promoted to fill his position as supervisor. He'll be training with Mr. Clancy until his last day, and that led to the open inspector position in that area. So our staff consists of 38 inspectors, 7 supervisors, 2 EIAOs, 2 compliance officers, 1 part-time EIAO, part-time compliance officer, and then 4 central office staff. So we currently have 54 employees. We continue to take advantage of the USDA FSIS virtual training classes. We just had 2 inspectors complete the inspection method course in September, which used to be a month-long course that was held in a different state. Since COVID, they've started conducting these virtually, and some of the FSIS inspectors have gone to in-person classes, but they continue to hold the state courses, or the courses for the states virtually. So looking ahead, Dr. Swikowski is going to continue meeting weekly with small groups of inspectors for training, and also our new inspectors. We're expecting at least 4 new facilities to join the meat and poultry inspection program in the next few months. These are 4 that are on our radar, and we recently have been surprised sometimes with plants that just say, hey, we're ready to come on. So we're expecting 4 new ones to come on, at least that we know of. I will be attending the National Association of Meat and Food Inspector Directors meeting at the USAHA meeting in Washington DC on October 16th and 17th. Dr. Renee Swikowski will join virtually. She's our Deputy Director. During this meeting, as Dr. Marsh mentioned before, we will be addressing the shortfall in our budget, hopefully, with FSIS. And then HACCP trainings for the inspectors, like I mentioned before, will be trained by the EIOs, and that will continue on a quarterly basis. We continue our weekly teleconferences with the FSIS Chicago District Office concerning our cooperative interstate shipment program. That's held jointly with Ohio Meat and Poultry Inspection, and we share pandemic and CIS related information. We also have a weekly teleconference with our field staff, and that continues on a weekly basis. And then we meet monthly with the Indiana Meat Packers and Processors Association and the State Department of Ag to help support new and existing plants. And that will continue on a monthly basis as well. Any questions?
Sir, a quick question. With all the new plants that have come on, is it in any certain area in the state, or is it pretty widespread throughout the state?
We're seeing most of it in that northeast area and also the central west area as well. That's where they're mostly concentrated, but we are seeing it all over the state.
For those of you who weren't aware, several years ago, we were there wanting new facilities because you couldn't get your animals in. It just was impossible almost to get an animal in to be slaughtered at a plant. And today, it's so nice to have these new ones on one hand, but we have to have the inspectors and the money on the other side. So we're that, freaking hard places where we are right now. Thank you.
We're doing our best to provide.
You're doing well so far.
Thank you.
Our lunch is not quite ready yet, so we're going to continue on until lunch is ready. So we're going to go with Patrick.
Good morning. I'll just highlight a couple points from my report. One of the first ones is the very first point there. You'll see that for this third quarter, we had 8 surveys and we had 15 federal check ratings. And here recently, we went over the difference between those. But I think one of the differences to notice is we had so few state surveys this quarter because there are so many federal check ratings. Now, that is kind of cyclical. And one of the things that keeps happening here is FDA is still in a little bit of a catch-up mode because they are now fully staffed. So when a federal check rating happens, our rating officers go with them, drive them around, make sure they get to the right place on the farms, and then it's a familiar face for our producers too. So that does lower the number of ratings they're able to do. During that time, you can see that our scores were still very good. 90 and above is passing, and both our farm sanitation scores and our enforcement score was a 96. The next thing I'd like to highlight is the third point in that quarterly highlights is we had no change in grade A farm numbers this quarter. So I believe, from what I can tell, that's the first time in 7 years we haven't lost numbers. So that was nice to see. We still have a few plants pending. They were hoping to be in production by now, but delays in materials and equipment have slowed everything down just a touch. So we're still expecting to see them up and running, hopefully by the end of the year, but has slowed things down just a little bit. And then the last one is in our partnerships and outreach. We've sent a few people to FDA courses, and the only point I'd like to highlight on that is we were actually able to send people. So we sent feedback to our FDA liaison, and several states have too as well, as FDA was wanting to turn all of those trainings virtual. And for us, that was a problem because you're looking at complex equipment. Part of that is tracing pipelines, and you only get better at that by doing that. There's no real good way to do that on a screen. So feedback was heard, and FDA has committed to moving all of those trainings back to in person, which is great news. The The one downside we saw is FDA, however, is also cutting funding for training for states to be able to travel. So we're still working on that, but that's okay. So it's good to see they've moved stuff back in person, and we feel like that's better opportunities for our staff. Be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Pat. Dr. Marsh.
Well, thank you very much, all of you, and appreciate all the reports from the team here and your indulgence listening to reports. I think there's, as always, a lot of activity going on here at the board, and we try to give you a comprehensive review and still do it within a couple hours or so here on a quarterly basis. Just a little closer to home here, I'm really pleased to see Keith Beer back at this table. Keith, welcome. And I know you've had some challenges, and we've been thinking about you, and this board has been thinking about you in times that you weren't here, so we're glad to have you back.
Nice to be back.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Dr. Armstrong, we're glad to have you first time around this table, although you've participated virtually, so I'm really pleased to have you on board as well. And of course, for those of you who have been around this table for a while, at the risk of being repetitious, I'm extremely proud of this board because you folks, who was it? Will Rogers said the world is run by those who show up. And you folks show up, and it makes a big difference. And I really, really appreciate it. I know you have to juggle schedules and your work elsewhere, family and professional lives, and so I appreciate it very much. And we do offer these virtual options, and of course now with all the taping and live streaming and all these sorts of things that will take place down the line, I'll have to watch what I say during this part of
It didn't stop me about IU.
No, that's true. Well, there's always a first one. So. I'm also extremely pleased that about a year or so ago, I met with the poultry industry to take a look at that sector and what the demands might be looking forward in the future. And we came up with an agreement with the Indiana State Poultry Association on some of the duties that the Board of Animal Health would have and the State Poultry Association would have moving forward. And they were extremely helpful in supporting 3 new positions through the legislative process. And as Gary has already reported, we had a poultry health specialist, a poultry veterinarian, and a veterinary epidemiologist. And I'm really pleased that we have 2 of the 3 of those filled. And so you met Dr. Isaac Trainer here today, and he's a newly mentioned veterinarian now of the Purdue program, and so we're really pleased to have him on board. And of course, he was an intern with us one summer, and we didn't drive him away, and so we invited him to come and join us full time. So Doctor, we're really pleased to have you on board. That's a new position as a veterinary epidemiologist, and as you've heard with the wide breadth of issues that go on with diseases in all species, that having someone who can drill down and try to discover why or why not. And so that's no small order, Doctor, but I think you're up to the task. The other position that we're really pleased about is our poultry health specialist, and that position was posted, and we'll have on November the 13th join us Chelsea Leatherman. Chelsea currently works for the Indiana State Poultry Association, so she's going to join BOAH, and we're in conversations with the State Poultry Association about her role within our organization to support this industry moving forward. So I'm really pleased with these. I'm still looking for a poultry veterinarian, and as been mentioned at the top of the meeting here, we're looking for someone, and at least in my estimation, someone who's interested in doing anything with feathers, we've got them. We rank nationally in a number of these categories, so if somebody wants to see layers and turkeys and broilers and ducks, we have them all. Besides, in addition to that, a large number of backyard flocks. And then, of course, our collaborations with the Department of Natural Resources on wild birds. So there's lots of feathers in this state. So someone who may be interested in spending some time with birds, we certainly have those here. I also wanted to point out in my report there, and I really appreciate Dr. Hendricks and the efforts. Her enthusiasm for her work is infectious, and appreciate your continuing efforts because I know it hasn't been easy. And you persevering through that. This board, as you recall, we called a special meeting in August of 22 to deliberate on the ADDL's budget request. And as I mentioned in my report, the board approved that budget request contingent upon there being a strategic plan developed for the ADDL and diagnostic services for the state. So Dr. Ken Andrews was secured for that purpose, and we have met with him, and I know there are a lot of folks that visited with him with the goal of having that report by the end of calendar year 23 here. So I'm hopeful for what's in that report for all of our future, but thanks, Doctor. There's been a lot of work on that front up there to make that happen. Also, in speaking of the legislative front, Sarah talked about the dog bill from last year, and it had a good bit of debate and not enough debate for some folks, and so it didn't make it through the process, but we've been in conversations with people about selling dogs in this state, and where they can be sold and where they can't, and what kind of dog can be sold here or there, and preemption of sales of pups. And so there's been a good bit of discussion, and after this meeting's over, there will be some more this afternoon in preparation for some meetings later this week. Also in this session, we have a proposal that Catherine, and I want to thank Catherine for being here. Catherine Box is here, our liaison to the governor's office, and she has a rather famous relative. For those of you familiar with the many live broadcasts during the COVID period there, where Dr. Chris Box was a state health commissioner, happens to be Catherine's mother. And so she comes from good stock, let's say. And so thank you, Catherine, for being here. Really appreciate it. She's been very helpful. And although we've only known each other a short time, she's been heavily engaged with the activity here at BOAH. So thanks for being with us all day here today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Appreciate that. And as we prepare for the next legislative session, we've talked about budgets out of the last one, et cetera, and guys should start preparing for the next one. And we'll just do it. And so we have a proposal that's in the governor's hands for consideration as a potential agency bill for this time around. And I wanted to share with you the 3 planks that are within it. And again, it's all being considered at this point, but I wanted you to be aware of it. Most of these circle around the vet board, the other board that's now meeting out here. One is on the criminal background checks. And so as a process of moving the Board of Veterinary Medicine to co-locate with BOAH, that part of it was not moved with BOAH. And so in other words, if I am a new veterinarian and I apply for a license in this state as an initial applicant, there's a criminal background check that's done. And that data currently has to go back to the professional licensing agency because we're not listed as an agency to receive the information from those criminal background checks. So we're working on some potential cleanup language so that we can expedite the application process for those new graduates and folks who want a license for the first time. The second piece that we're looking at, it relates to license renewals. And as veterinarians around this table know that the license renewal period will close on the 15th of this month. And so that's on a 2-year cycle that veterinarians renew. And as it turns out, we've already sent out the notices for the registered veterinary technicians of the state because they have to renew by January the 1st. So we've got both of these overlap for a period of time, and there's a lot of work going on that front. For veterinarians and also for technicians this time around, there are a few questions that are being asked of those as they renew their license or registrations. And it's just asking basic information about where you are in this state and kind of what your plans are for the next 2 years up until the next renewal cycle. This has been done routinely in the health professions, physicians, chiropractors, nurses, et cetera. And we're collaborating with what's called the BOAH Center. It has a much longer title, but the BOAH Center for Healthcare Information. And Dr. Hannah Maxey on the IUPUI campus, or John Ball, whatever it is today down there. So it's Purdue at Indianapolis and IU or whatever it is. But anyway, Dr. Maxey is part of IUPUI. And they developed dashboards online for all this demographic and projection data for nurses and physicians, whatever, that's extremely helpful. And we don't have it for the veterinary community. About, so where are you and what are your plans? And particularly at a time when we've talked in these meetings about veterinary deserts and lack of coverage in areas. So really, where is everybody? And so those same set of questions will be asked of the veterinary technicians as their registration process starts. it's actually a requirement for those human health professions. And so we would like to piggyback on that language to say, no, we need this as a requirement for veterinarians and technicians. So it's on an ongoing basis. Now, if you look at the questions for physicians, it's about 36 questions that you have to go through to even get to a license opportunity. But there's questions about Medicare and all these things that aren't germane to our world. So you're scanning all that up, and we'll get down to just a handful of questions so that there's ongoing demographic information for these licensed professionals, both veterinarians and veterinary technicians. So that's language that's being proposed. And the third part of that is a proposal for a state-based loan repayment program. And so I think there's 12 or 14 states across the country that have loan repayment programs for veterinarians. And in our case, we've included veterinary technicians. I think that is unique. I don't know that that's been offered in other states of the country. This is not a budget session, so it's not asking for a dime. It's just saying, can we get the foundational language in place, whether it's later a state appropriation or it could be done by gifts and behests, et cetera. So there's ways to fund it on down the line. But we've taken a look, Laura Turner, our director of the Vet Board, has taken a look at all these various programs around the country, and we've taken the best. And so I hope we've got best of show as we bring it to the legislature this session. So that's in review. I just wanted to give you an update because by the time we meet again, the session will have started. So we'll already be in the throes of that. So both legislative and personnel front, there's been a good bit of activity. Our ADDL, and then Virgil and others around the table may be able to speak to, as I understand, the resolution passed at Indiana Farm Bureau with regard to the budgeting process for the ADDL. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but is there anything you'd like to share on that front?
No, just as you said, that'll go in front of our full delegate session for final blessing at our annual convention in December. So I don't expect it to change.
Okay, very good. Well, Virgil and David Harden and Dr. John Fights and others are very helpful in securing that language. So thank you for doing that. Virgil was updating me throughout that deliberative process, so I really, really appreciate it. The Vet Board did meet in this room for the first time on July the 26th, and so it looks like they're going to run on kind of a quarterly meeting schedule, just like you folks, and we'll utilize this same space. And just know that this whole live streaming business, it applies to that board as well. And I think I may have shared with you at the last board meeting, and I know this one's being taped, but I think it's important. The kind of things that we talk about around this table is one set of information, but when you get before the vet board and you're appearing there for whatever reason, and you've had some sort of a challenge, it's a little different if you're live streaming someone who's talking about maybe their medical conditions, their mental health counseling, and all these sorts of things in a live stream environment. I'll be honest, I want to make sure, not only with this board, but certainly the other board, they understand that this is a live stream, archived kind of deal. And so it's important for the board to have the information they need to deliberate and adjudicate the case. On the other hand, there could be some sensitive information. So we'll be aware of that as we move forward. The Cull Swine Market meeting here in Indianapolis, as Dr. Shipman has reported, I think was a success. We had great people. We literally had people from California and North Carolina in the meeting, and I think it worked out extremely well. A lot of activity in the swine world, also including the Swine Health Improvement Plan in Bloomington, Minnesota. Their House of Delegates met. This is still in a pilot project at the national level, with the hope of codifying it into the Code of Federal Regulations in 2025, and early 2025, I hope, as that moves forward. But there is a lot of work in that swine arena out there. I reported to you also about a concept that I've taken to the National Assembly of State Animal Health Officials, all the state veterinarians of the country, because of my increasing concern about the ability of states to respond and deal with either the day-to-day activities of animal health and veterinary medicine in their state, and certainly with high consequence diseases like high-FAI. As you've already heard reported here today, there's over 58 million birds destroyed in 47 different states around the country, and some of these states, there's no infrastructure at all. And I know some of you have dealt with these other states because you have business interests in multiple states, and it gets to be really challenging. And I'll be quite candid, we get a lot of calls from producers in other states saying, can you help us? Well, we're only as strong as that weakest link, as they say. And so here we are with these high consequence diseases. So as I've reported to you before, I've been concerned about this for some time. And I think in 2022, it really showed up as states are trying to grapple with high path AI. And I know Drs. Cooper and Cobb and Shippen and others have received calls and inquiries, not only from producers in other states, but state animal health officials trying to get help. I'm also concerned, and I realize Dr. Hines is here as our colleague from USDA, that Kevin Shea, the administrator of APHIS, at our meeting in Minneapolis last fall at USAHA, repeated from the podium 2 or 3 times. He said, we can't keep coming to help either. I thought, well, if the feds aren't coming and the states aren't prepared, so who's doing this work? Because it's essential for us to deal with these diseases, to maintain trade and continuity of business. So I shared a survey, and thanks to Denise, she helped me put this survey together, and we sent it to the state veterinarians in the country and said, how would you rate your preparedness for day-to-day activities, just everyday work? And then the second question is, how would you rate your ability to deal with high consequence diseases? And it was very good, average, very poor, very poor. We try to make it as basically possible because that's the way I think. And so we'll just keep it simple. And so even without a proposal, and therefore, based on that survey, is there any value in taking a look at a state-based accreditation program like laboratories have, or colleges of veterinary medicine, or as it turns out, the World Organization for Animal Health has out of Paris for countries to make sure you have at least a minimum level of preparedness. So and without even having a document or a specific plan, it's just kind of an idea and a concept right now. And nearly 3/4 of the state veterinarians said, yeah, sign me up. We need some help. And so we're continuing that. As a matter of fact, yesterday afternoon, I had an opportunity to be on a call with the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, Animal Agriculture Committee. And so Commissioner Hatcher out of Tennessee, who's a former state veterinarian in Tennessee, invited me to present this idea to the NASDA group yesterday, and it had overwhelming support from them. So we have a survey that we'll share with them. And at USAHA's meeting, which is outside of DC later this month, I'll be talking to what's called the allied industries, but it's all the National Cattlemen, National Pork, Chicken Council, et cetera, all those groups to get their input as well in the process. But I'm continually concerned about the preparedness of states to respond, and more needs to be done on that front, so I'll keep you advised as we move forward. I also indicated a number of meetings I've been to. I could write a good page on all of these, but there's some really fascinating meetings out there. For example, the African Swine Fever Trinational Forum in Raleigh, North Carolina. You had colleagues from Canada, Mexico, and the United States. And the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense was just last week at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Some names that you may be familiar with this bipartisan commission, and I appreciate one of our board members, Dr. Ragland, being in attendance down there, and Dr. Hendricks and Dr. Bowen from the NDDL and others from the ag sector, so it's really helpful. But this commission is basically trying to figure out, are there things that we needed to address at the national level to better prepare our country? I had an opportunity to speak before this group at Kansas State University in 2017, but it has the likes of certainly our own Susan Brooks, former U.S. representative from Indiana, Donna Shalala, you may remember that name. She was Secretary of Health and Human Services in the Clinton administration. Representatives from Pennsylvania and Michigan, also had the former FDA Commissioner, Margaret Hamburg. Tom Ridge, you may remember Tom Ridge, 2-time governor of Pennsylvania, and he was tapped by George Bush to be the first Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Because prior to 9/11, we didn't have a Department of Homeland Security. I think there were 12 or 14 federal agencies that were put into DHS at that time, and Tom Ridge did that. But anyway, all that to be said, that we had an opportunity to speak before that commission at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway last week. The Poultry Health Council has met last Friday, and it's been mentioned earlier today, but I really appreciate, and Ty, your endorsement and help with that as well, to engage all the poultry industry on some of these topics of extreme importance. That industry, we talked about the growth of meat inspection and other sectors. By golly, that poultry industry continues to grow. There's just a lot of interest in this state, and even though we're the smallest state geographically west of the Appalachian Mountains, there's a lot going on these sectors, and poultry is no exception. I also made the trip out to Kansas City last week for the American Association of Veterinary State Boards. Never been to that meeting before. AAVSB, so now that we have the vet board here, it's the association of all the licensing boards. And so there's 63 jurisdictions, both in Canada and the United States, that are members of AAVSB. So Laura Turner and I went out there and made the trip to Kansas City. And it was really quite a fascinating meeting because the things that we talk about around this table and that vet board table are not unique to Indiana. The challenges of veterinary workforce and dealing with licensing issues and all this sort of thing are certainly prevalent across the country. They even had speakers from the United Kingdom, Ireland, New Zealand, Italy, and they all said the same thing. And so it's global. And it's a challenge that we're meeting here are not unique to us, but rather are shared with our colleagues across the globe. Coming up, next month, the early part of next month, is the measures to minimize influenza transmission in swine exhibitions. My gosh, a $54 title for something that basically says that we had influenza in pigs and children in 2012 at exhibitions in Indiana. And as I recall, it's the first time CDC actually identified it as the same virus in pigs and children. And so from that, we launched into this discussion because for those of you in the exhibition world, whether it's horses, cattle, pigs, or whatever it might be, once our public health colleagues became interested in this topic about having influenza that was infecting children from pigs, they proposed to close exhibitions, just not have them anymore. I said, well, we have influenza of pigs about all the time, asymptomatic pigs that you won't see. And so anyway, that's where the measures to minimize document came from. It's a collaboration that we'll host it here at BOAH in this room, and they'll come from all over the country as they did in 2013 when we wrote the original document. I'm excited about that group coming in because some really, really smart folks on influenza, a lot smarter than I am, and one including Dr. Andy Bowman from Ohio State, who we've been collaborating with for the last decade or so. And his research in influenza viruses, not only in swine and crossover into children, but he offers that research in influenza viruses to St. Jude's Research Facility for children down there. So there's a lot of cross-pollination there that's extremely helpful. So anyway, a number of things are underway. I'm excited about everything that's going on now and our prospects and challenges for the future. Extremely proud of the team that I have here, not only those represented in the room, but all those across the state. You've heard about 38 meat inspectors and what have you, and they show up and they make it happen out there. Dairy inspection happens, and whether it's I've become spoiled. I still take the after hours calls, but now I just dispatch them to more capable people to answer rabies questions and dead animal complaints and things like that. So I'm really, really proud of the team. But I'm particularly proud of our state and the accomplishments that are here, because even in the meeting I was in Kansas City, when I told them about the Center for Animal Policy, and I said, how did you do that? I said, I didn't. I mean, none of this is done by any one singular person, but it's a collaboration of a lot of people. And so it's all the things that you read about in your handouts here today in the center and other activities with our ADDL, but it's a collaboration day in and day out that frankly doesn't exist everywhere. And I hear about from other states that it just doesn't run quite as smoothly everywhere. And so I'm proud of what you folks do every day and our ability to accomplish the tasks on behalf of our citizens. I've offered dates for next year. I do this each year, as you may know, just to offer them. They're not cast in stone, but we've tried to take a look at all the major national meetings and various things. And I know you have other meetings that we didn't contemplate, so I think we've offered January the 9th of 2024. January the 9th, I think, is the one that we proposed.
Any questions or problems with anyone with January 9th? That will be our meeting date.
Oh.
Now, thank you, Dr. Marsh, for everything that you do. And for those of you who are new, either online or here today, we don't realize how much this office does. And this office does this because of the people who are here at this office. Each one of them has their own role, their own aspect to add to, which comes to a great big fulmination. And Dr. Marsh does give his people credit. He doesn't take all the credit. However, it takes a person in charge to put all this together too. Nothing to downplay any of you people over here. It's always a team. And it's always been a team. And I've said this many times in our meetings. I will put our state veterinarian and this office up against any state in this nation. And I'll tell them, we have the best. And I firmly believe that and feel that way. And it needs to continue that way.
We'll do our best.
Now, one comment, you said you needed a poultry person. Don't let them meet with these two before you hire them. They won't say they won't hire.
Okay.
Especially Dr. Kopp. I hear from Dr. Kopp. We do have lunch. I'm assuming it is ready, so it's straight across the hallway for those of you who have not been here before. And with that, I am going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks to our corn and soy folks. I know many of your